Hello, YouTube world. We're going to try this again this time, see if we can get the entire 2-hour conversation. We're trying out some new techniques, so hopefully it'll work. Fingers crossed. Well, here we go, episode 41 with Cody Weese. All right, we're here with Cody Weese for episode 41 of Conversations with the Mind. I'm Shane Lamaster, your host as always. How are you, Cody?
I am doing fantastic.
Great to see you back.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
so much for having me.
So you've been on the show before. I think I was looking it up right before you got here. I think you were episode 16 and 17 because we split that one in half, right? Did. And so it's been a little while.
Yeah, that was...
A few months.
Yeah, that was back in fall.
Yeah, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
You've gone through a lot since then.
Yeah, I have a degree now.
Yeah, right on. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Graduation is huge.
Yeah, it was surreal. I was like, oh my God, like, I don't know anything, and they're going to give me a piece of paper saying I do. Crazy.
So, yeah, welcome back to the show, and I wanted to, since you're a return guest, I wanted to start with, we always start with what does Conversations with the Mind mean to you? You've already answered that, but I want to know, since you've answered it for us last time, has there been any changes as far as, like, what that means to you, and how maybe that phrase has had an impact on your own life? And what's been on your mind recently?
I think the first time when I was here, I said it was a means for progress. And I still think to some extent that is true. I think it's changed in my mind in that the progress is why do what we do? Why keep going? Because lately the last 6 months, I've gone down this philosophical rabbit hole of, why don't we just become nihilistic? What is the point?
Yeah, why not just go live up in a cave?
Exactly. Why do I have to finish college? Why is that necessary? Why shouldn't I drink all the time? It was some struggles like that where I was constantly thinking, what's the point? And I think Conversations with the Mind is trying to get to the deeper meaning of why you should do it. Why you should try to make the best of your life and how you can possibly do that. And I think the first place you should start is with yourself. You should think. Thinking is really hard, especially critically thinking. And to do that, it takes time, and it's Conversations with the Mind. If you really think, I think you can form a general schema of why you should avoid that nihilistic rabbit hole. And I think with Conversations with the Mind, that's how we can address that.
Okay, so these are more existential questions.
Yes,
right?
A lot of existential questions.
Big picture.
Yeah.
And that's common, too, for someone in your position going through a big life transition right now.
Yeah.
You're going from the last, 4 years of college.
Yeah.
And feeling pretty secure in that role, in that identity as a student, right? And that totally shifting now in the last 6 months and anticipating that shift coming up.
Yeah.
It's normal to have these flashes of existential thought, what is the purpose, right? It happens before a lot of big transitions too. It happened before I got married. You know, it happens, when big events happen to my co-host Tank. He has, we found out he has cancer. So as soon as we get that news, right? Now we're in a transition period with him too. And so that's influencing, the flood of existential questions and mortality and what does it all mean and where does he go when he dies and will I see him again and all these things. Yeah. And so that's really cool that you're asking those questions. What have you come up with so far? What are some of the answers you...
So what I think, because I get this question, or I guess it's a statement a lot, and it can be a little frustrating, is when an adult is like, oh, you're going into the adult world, now you're going to have to get a job. And it's a job? That's easy. Why am I here? What's next? And I was going down this, I was thinking about this a lot in the last year, where my childhood is over. And that really I didn't think about that. I was just, talking with my brother, and it was oh wow, what happened is all that's going to happen in that stage of my life. I'll never go through high school again. I'll never go through middle school again. And growing up, that's done. Now my college years are done. Now I'm going into this new phase, and it's scary, and it's mysterious, and it's not scary because it's like, oh, now I have to pay more taxes or 9-to-5 job. It's like, come August, I don't need to go to school. Like, life just keeps going. You know, it's like, what do I do? Like, no one there. I don't have an advisor to say this is what you need to do in this step by this time with these techniques.
Yeah, and I think that's such a flaw of our collegiate systems. I think anyway. You know, when I was getting my bachelor's and my master's degree, I had the same feeling. Like, I'm done now. Now what? Like, I have no guidance. And I know there's, you know, I guess there's like alumni services and career advisor services, but they're not pushed well enough.
I totally agree.
And I felt like, you know, I never got any education on how to start a business, or, you know, I got the education on how to do counseling, but not how to run an electronic medical record, or, you know, submit for taxes, or I didn't get an education on any of that stuff. So I felt ill-prepared for the next chapter, and that was kind of scary to me. And then I started having questions like you did, like, what do I want to, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? What do I want my career path to look like? And I can tell you from now, like, the moment I graduated, I had an idea of what it was going to look like. It hasn't turned out anything like that. All my best laid plans have not come to fruition, but in a good way, because I've been open to the possibility that my aspirations and my dreams are limited in and of themselves. So when I remain open, you know, I conquered my 5-year goals after 1 year. I conquered my 10-year goals at the 5-year mark. And I'm glad I didn't like limit myself just to, this is my path, this is what I have to do. And I just kind of let myself open to exploring and seeing where I fit in, and I found much greater success that way.
And I think that's like natural. I mean, with kids, I know from what I've learned in my developmental psychology is that you want to expose your kids to as many different things as possible. You shouldn't try to, okay, you're going to be a football player, or you're going to play golf, you're going to be a cheerleader. You know, you shouldn't try to do that. You should expose them to as many things as possible. Have them try to be as open to new things as possible. That way, they have maximal, the chances of them finding something they enjoy, finding something they're good at, all those things are at the maximum level they can be. And with that, I totally agree. Like, I used to be like, I'm going to graduate school right after college, straight into it. And now it's like, I don't think I need to do that. I'm going to graduate school, obviously, but it's more, let's see where life takes me, you know? And while struggling with that existential question, I don't like the standard narrative of college, graduate school, career, family. Of course, I want like bits and pieces of those, but I think you get caught up in the what's next, and sometimes you might forget about the current, you know? Because already, I mean, an hour after my graduation ceremony, my brain just started going, okay, you know, you should start filling out that one application for your master's program, or, you know what, yeah, you have a job lined up, but you should still keep an eye out for other opportunities, you know, whether they be secondary or replace your first one. And it was just like, relax, you know, it'll happen, it's fine, you know, life is gonna go on, and it'll work out. And I've noticed, like, when I think that way, and because it's hard for me to think that way, to think, relax, if it deviates from the plan, that's okay, maybe even more beneficial. And so far, it's helped me. It's helped my mental health a lot too. When I'm more like, I don't want to say laid back, because that makes it like, seem like I don't care about anything, you know.
Sure.
But I'm more open to different pathways to the same thing, and that has helped me a lot.
It makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but I'm glad that you are making room for rest.
Yes.
You just went through 4 years of intense academic studies, you
Yeah.
know, and giving yourself permission to take a little break, you
Yeah.
know, celebrate a little bit, you know, hopefully in healthy ways, but,
Yeah.
you know, just giving yourself the time and the space to let it soak in what you just did and what you accomplished, instead of just moving right on to the next thing. You know, I have a rough time doing that too. Like, I'll accomplish one thing and then I'm already thinking about the next thing. So I'm trying to, in myself, like, slow myself down. Like, after I accomplish something, just, you know, take a week, take 2 weeks, and just breathe and be like, and just soak in, like, how good this feels to be done. You know, so that's an important piece too for mental health as well, is making room for self-care, as if because it is just as important, if not more important, than the actual productive work that we're doing. But in this society, it's not presented to us that way. It's presented to us that resting and you know, sitting with your accomplishments is not productive.
Lazy. And I wonder, and maybe you can tell me if you feel the same way. This last finals week, I only had 2 finals, and basically I only had to study for one of them, and it was Monday morning. So I got it out of the way, and that Monday night, and then the rest of the week, I didn't have homework. I didn't have a thesis to work on. I had nothing. I could just watch Dexter on Netflix, and it was so uncomfortable for me, because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, if I don't have homework, what do I do?
There's got to be something to do.
I was like, you know what? I'll go clean my room. And I would clean my room, and then I start watching TV again. I'd be like, you know what? There is one dish in the sink. Let me go put that. And then I was starting to find these things, and by Tuesday, mid-Tuesday, I was going crazy. I was like, what do I do? Like, nothing. The house is spotless. School is done. I don't have work. And it was so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. And I felt so guilty. That was the thing. I felt guilty. I didn't know what to do. I was like, I'm definitely being lazy right now. Because I think you're right. Like, if you take time to binge watch Netflix, you're like, wow, like, so lazy. You know? Especially like me being my college age. People are like, wow, you just watch Netflix? It's so, like, go outside, go do this. And it's like, well...
Sure, but they're just taking a snapshot of like couple days of your life. They didn't see like the last 4 years of intense studying and staying home from social events and things like that, and all the sacrifices you made too that make you the antithesis of lazy. Instead, they only see like, oh, what? You're taking time off? Like, you need to get back to work. You need to get out there and find a job already.
And I've heard that, like, oh, you're going to take a year off? That's a bad idea. You know, you're never going to go back. And it's, no. I will go back because, you know, my degree is in behavior and cognitive neuroscience, and just some of the prereqs for that were a year of OChem, a year of physics, a year of biochem, and that's like not even like just the foundation, so I could study the neuroscience was super hard. So it's, no, I'll go to graduate school. I'm not worried, but I do want some time where I can come home on a Friday night and go, you know what, I can go get dinner. Or my friends, hey, you want to go grab a drink? Yeah, I do. You know, and I want to at least enjoy that for a year before I jump right back into the thick of things. And I think for me, it's just going to be better for my mental health.
I'm glad that you know yourself. I definitely knew people in undergrad who did take a year off and never went back. But I also know people in undergrad who took time off and then went back, just like they said they would. So I think it has more to do with your personal level of commitment to yourself and what your dreams are. Like for me, after undergrad, I went straight into master's program. Not because I was afraid or anything that I wouldn't get back into it. I just wanted to stay in school as long as possible because I didn't want to go get a job. You know, I was okay with learning all the time.
So do you like school?
I love school. If
okay.
I could stay in school for the rest of my life, I would. And now, luckily, people are paying me to go to school this fall, which is great.
That's awesome.
So, So, for me, I went straight into a master's program because I wanted to stay in school. And then after my master's program, I wanted to continue with the doc program. But doc programs are a lot more selective. And so I was applying for 4 years, I think, to doc programs all over the country. But really trying to bank on staying here in Fort Collins, and it just didn't happen. I would get accepted to other places, but I held out for Colorado. And so in between my master's and now my PhD that I'll be starting in the fall, there's like a 5-year gap there where I did get back into the workforce. You know, I did make my impression on the Fort Collins community as best I could with my mental health career, and will continue to do so in private practice with Mind Ops. But now, I had that commitment. You know, I knew from the moment I started my undergrad that I'm going to take this all the way to the end of a PhD.
Same.
And now, it's even shifted a little bit to where I'm like, maybe one PhD might not even be enough. Like I might want to go get multiple doctorates in different subjects, because a lot of my interests kind of intersect, but again, I don't want to keep myself limited to one path, one box, one career path. I want to gain as many tools and as many assets as I can. It's like leveling up in video games, right? I want to get as much as that as possible so that the world opens up to me and I get to choose what I get to do.
Why do you think people do that, where they choose the one path? Why is that they stay in the box? Do you think that's a conscious decision, or they're not aware of it?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I see people on both ends, like so I'm a perfect example of this. Since high school, I've always wanted to be a professional therapist. So I set that intention, and that's what I went to undergrad for. When all my friends around me were kind of bouncing around majors, I'm like, no, like I'm set. Like I don't deviate at all. And I stayed locked in, and through my master's program, kind of got to explore a little bit of what was my specialty going to be. Yeah. And now in PhD, I really get to broaden out and be like, okay, how do I want to have an impact on the world with my own research and my own ideas? So for me, it kind of molded and shifted and changed over time. But I know people who stayed locked in from an early age. I have a friend who wanted to be a heart surgeon from the time he was in elementary school. His dad had these computer programs, like old school, like on the old Apple computer with like the 6-inch screen. Yeah. These computer programs that had like mock surgeries. So he's in like elementary school doing these mock surgeries on these old school computers, just perfecting technique back then. And he stayed locked in, and now he is a leading heart surgeon out in, I think, Mass General in Boston. Oh, my God. Yeah, so people stay locked in. Athletes do the same thing. Yeah. Stay locked in from a young age, like, I'm going to be in the NFL, and then often, they make it sometimes.
What do you think the psychological consequences are if they don't? Mm-hmm. If they're on that path, I'm going to be this, and they get derailed, whether it be...
Sure. So let me get to that in a minute. Okay. But, on the other end of the spectrum, I also see people kind of fall into a rut, fall into a path that I don't know if it's chosen for them or conditioned into them. Almost like people give up on their dreams. I've seen that, and then they're just okay with working a 9-to-5 boring job, and they're just okay with that. Yeah. So I see it on both ends of the spectrum. And your question is a good one. What happens when you are laser focused from the beginning and you get diverted off the path by maybe no fault of your own? Yeah. Right? There's a lot of loss of identity. Yeah. So if we attach ourselves too tightly to an idea of who we are and who we should be and who we're gonna be, if that gets taken away, then oftentimes we're feeling lost. Like, I don't know who I am now. I don't know what I need to do. I've talked about this on the podcast before. That happened to me when I was in my jiu-jitsu career. In my first knee injury, I thought it was over. I thought I'd never do any kind of sport ever again. And my identity was so tied up in my athletics that I got into a deep depression. I felt like there's nothing left. Like, these existential questions started coming. Like, what's the purpose anymore of life if I can't do the one thing that I felt like I was competent at? Again, another big transition. And through those existential questions and looking at that, I was able to see that I was much more than just an athlete. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky to have found that mindset on my own. And I teach it to a lot of my clients, that same thing, that you are so much more than you think you are. Mm-hmm. You're so much more than you give yourself credit for, and so much more than that story that you tell yourself about who you are. I used to tell myself, I'm an athlete, I'm a student, and that's it. Yeah. But then the athlete part's taken away, and I have to re-examine, what else am I? Well, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a friend, you know, and those relationships needed some work, you know, so I was kind of being forced into growth in other areas, which I'm very grateful for. But a lot of people don't find the same answers that I found. A lot of people, that happens to them, and they just stay lost, and then they get stuck in, you know, like a cycle of self-pity almost. Like,
Yeah, and I went through something similar in the beginning of my college. From early high school, I wanted to be a doctor, medical doctor. Didn't know what kind. I was like, I will go to medical school. That is just, as the sun will rise, I am going to medical school. And went to college, started college. You know, had a little too much fun, as from the first podcast. But I remember the day I decided, I was like, I'm not going to go to med school. And it was this weird, like, well, if I'm not going to be a doctor, what am I going to be? You know, because I started taking more, like, biomedical classes, and they were cool. Like, in the fact that, like, you could watch a TED Talk for, like, 10 minutes, and it's like, oh, that's cool. But just not, I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't care what cells do. I don't care about this. And then I went through this phase where I didn't know what I was going to do. And I would, like, call my mom, like, every other day. But, you know what, I'm going to be an engineer. 3 days later, not going to be an engineer, Mom. I'm going to be a chemist. 3 days later, not going to be a chemist, Mom. You know, and so on and so forth. And that's what led me down my first, like, existential, like, questioning rabbit hole. I'm like, well, what's the point? You know, what am I going to do? Who am I going to be? And then I realized, I'm like, well, what I do vocationally is not necessarily who I will be. So as soon as I'm able to, like, understand that, like, it offers so much more growth. And I was thankful. I was like, oh, I'm not going to be a doctor. Like, that just opens so many doors, you know, and I can open a door and peek in and go, oh, that's what this is? No, maybe not for me. And I go to the next door. And then the thing, and I wonder if you had something similar maybe when you were younger, though, is I was like struggling with these deep existential questions and who I am and what is it to be a human, and, you know, especially in today. And I was like, I want to be a psychologist, you know. I want to explore this realm of thought with people, and hopefully they're helped, and so am I, you know. I think Carl Rogers, you know Carl Rogers, I'm assuming, he talked a lot about that, like, a relationship is a two-way street, you know. And once I realized that's what I want to do, and, like, I found something that I truly am like, oh, this, not only can I, like, make money from it as a career, but I get to help answer these big existential questions. You know, it was just such a relief. And it's just so good thinking about. And now that I know what I'm going to be, the path to how I'm going to get there, it doesn't matter. I know I'll get there. You know, and that's what you were talking about earlier, that openness. It's freeing. It's so freeing.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, it doesn't have to be, I have a full set path lined up, and it's completely linear to the end on one end of the extreme. And then on the other end, you know, we have the option to just be free floating. And, you know, this is kind of, I've seen a lot of people do this. Some people in my... I won't name names, but I know some people who just kind of floated from major to major in college and never graduated with any degree, but were in college for 6-7 years and explored like 6 or 7 different majors, and they're okay with that because for them the end goal was not necessarily the degree. Maybe that was their parents' goal for them. But for them it was more about learning and social learning and the experience that they got through college, right? So on one end, so there's these two extremes, right? And I don't think we have to be in one or the other camp. I think there's a middle way with everything. You know, that's what Buddhism helps inform me in my life, is that there's a middle way, there's a gray area for everything. And so I really like your example, which I think is completely healthy, is have a long-term goal. set your intention and your commitment that this is what I'm going to achieve, and this is an achievement that I'm going to work towards, but then give up control over how that happens, right? So give up any idea that you know or you can predict the future for the next 5 years and how you're going to achieve that career goal. You have no idea.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, all my best laid plans in the beginning after I graduated, they didn't happen.
Yeah.
But the outcomes that I wanted happened in different ways than I thought they'd come, and they came much faster because I was open to different ways.
And they were probably more beneficial.
Totally. And it's led me down paths that I never thought I'd go down, and it's given me expertise in certain specialties that I never anticipated that I would have under my belt, but it's helped inform who I am. And you asked me if I have any insight on this from my childhood, and I think I do. In my middle school and high school years, or the first 2 years of high school, so middle school up to like 10th grade, my entire focus was on how do I get myself prepared to go to SEAL training, Navy SEAL training. I'm doing everything I can to do that. I'm, an ROTC. I'm, playing multiple varsity sports. Getting good grades so I can go to Annapolis. I sent myself to military school. It's all focused on this one thing. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I get to military school and I find out, first of all, that the systems in which I wanted to possibly participate in the future were significantly flawed and against my own value and belief system. I have a strong belief system in meritocracy, that your efforts should dictate the accomplishments that happen, not who you know and things like that.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I saw that happening, and I'm like, screw this, man. If this is what it's like on this micro scale in a military high school, I don't want to be a part of this as an adult. And so I was almost relieved too when I was like, okay, I don't have the pressure on me anymore that I put on myself to become a Navy SEAL and an elite operator, highly selective program, right?
Yeah.
And now the pressure's off, so now I get to explore a little bit more. And right at that same time was my first ever experience. So up to this point, I'm totally sober, right? I'm like, both my parents are addicts, so I'm going to stay away from it. I know my genetic predisposition, and this is not going to help me get into the SEALs anyway, so I'm all about optimization and performing at my best. And around the same time that I started noticing, this is not who I want to be or what I want to do, I had my very first drug experience, which was with LSD.
That was your first?
First ever. Before tobacco, before cannabis, before
That's a big jump.
Alcohol. Yeah. So I go from being totally straight edge, and at military school, some of my friends gave me a tab of acid, and we all ate it in an amusement park, and my mind was forever open from there. Right?
Yeah.
So I come back from this experience never having asked myself those big existential questions. But the LSD experience kind of forces those questions to come to the surface.
Oh, yeah.
And after being exposed to that in the experience, I came out of it, and that was the only thing I was interested in, was figuring out, what does it all mean? What does it mean to be human? What is my place? Who am I? What am I doing here? What is the purpose of going to school? What is the purpose of the career, of family, of all these constructs, all these social constructs? And that is really what sparked my interest in psychology and the mind, is that mind-opening, mind-manifesting experience of LSD opened up my interest in exploring the mind, which I think is the last and most important uncharted territory for human beings to go. We can explore this physical universe to its limits, but I think the internal world, the innerverse, is limitless in its potential for exploration. And that's what really interested me, is that I already have this passion for learning, and here's something that I can continue to study to infinity. Right? There's no ending, Science can't touch it yet.
And that's what's crazy is, studying neuroscience, we go over all these different techniques, fMRI, TMS, all these things, and it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what is really there. And that's just the brain. And I used to be pretty deterministic and reductionist about the mind and the brain are the same thing. You know, the mind is just what the brain creates. But now that I finished my degree, and the mind is just so vast. You know, and you brought up LSD, and I'm just curious what you think about the decriminalization of mushrooms in Denver.
Yeah, so that's huge. I don't know if you listened to our podcast last week, but we had Kevin Matthews on. He was the campaign director for that Decriminalize Denver effort. So for our listeners who want to know more about it, go back and listen to the second hour of episode 40, where Kevin and I really get into the details of the Decriminalize Denver effort and what it means for our state. But yeah, thanks for asking. I have my own opinions about it for sure. And what it specifically?
Because what I've talked to a couple people about it, because I'm personally for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, psilocybin, as I'm sure you're aware, is not toxic for the brain. It's one of the least toxic substances you can ingest.
Yeah, correct. So for the listeners, go look up or Google Dr. David Nutt, N-U-T-T. He's out of London Imperial College in London, England, and he has a seminal study on toxicity of drugs across the spectrum. And we find that magic mushrooms or psilocybin is one of the least toxic substances on the entire planet, whereas like other things that are legal, alcohol and stuff, are at the higher ends of toxicity.
Oh, yeah.
And they're still legal, and we
Yeah.
still encourage their use through advertising and commercials, and yet
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important for people to know that these medicines, and that's also a personal view of mine. I view them as medicines. I used to view them as a drug, but the words
Semantics.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I think the decriminalized vote that went through, and it just barely went through. I think 2,000 votes is what passed it through.
Yeah, it was 50.6% for.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's gonna be historical.
Yeah.
I think we're living in history right now, and it's so cool to kind of like sit back and feel the ground trembling underneath us. Like there's some major collective consciousness shifting going on. In order for this effort to even pass in the first place, that signifies that there is a huge shift in consciousness in our society, because for the last 40, 50 years it's been prohibited.
Yeah.
You know? And now people are starting to come around. There's more woke people around, right?
Yeah.
They're starting to realize this isn't that damaging. Maybe I've heard of people having bad trips in the past, but I don't know anybody who's been hospitalized, or I don't know anybody who's done anything dangerous while on these medicines.
Yeah, they're like folklore.
Stories
of someone took too many.
Yeah, and jumping out of a building and stuff. And those stories are based off of real stories. But the actuality is that those instances happen so infrequent.
Yeah.
Like 1 out of 10,000.
Yeah.
Maybe even more. Those stories about people jumping from buildings and stuff. That happened in the government's testing of LSD. That was many decades ago.
Yeah.
And that's like the last legitimate story I've heard of that happening.
Yeah.
And still, like you said, folklore, it just spins itself over and over in the media cycle.
Yeah.
As if it's like new news. Like, no, this stuff is really, really safe if done in a proper way.
Yeah.
So the Decriminalized Denver thing is huge because it opens up a lot of pathways for new research. It opens up decriminalization efforts in other areas of the country.
Mm-hmm.
This will for sure help push federal legalization of cannabis, as politicians are going to start being like, well, they decriminalized mushrooms, so cannabis really isn't that big of a deal. Let's just let it pass now. So it's like a domino effect, and this is like the big domino that needed however many thousands of people to push that domino over, and now it's fallen, and now we're just waiting to see like, okay, what's next? Now California is going to decriminalize. Now Oregon. Now Mexico. The president of Mexico just said, I'm going to decriminalize all drugs. Get rid of the cartel. And this is right on the coattails of the Decriminalized Denver effort. Yeah. So this spark is lighting a fuse that I think is going to be a love bomb coming our way.
There's that saying that every avalanche is made of those individual snowflakes, and that's an example. One of the things I've heard, though, and I think this is just common with, like, I'm sure this was with marijuana and cannabis when it was decriminalized and legalized is, what are the kids gonna think? You know, how is it gonna affect the kids?
Sure.
And I think you're definitely more qualified to answer that than me. Like, I don't think this is gonna lead to this huge wave of kids taking mushrooms or anything like that. Or I don't see that as being a viable argument against it. Do you?
I agree with you. I do anticipate, and I spoke about this in the last podcast too, I do anticipate that there will probably be a celebratory spike in psilocybin use.
Yeah.
As there was with cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as soon as it was legalized, there were stores around the block of every dispensary. But now, a few years later, it's just normal. Like, you don't have to go wait in line to do anything. Right?
Yeah.
So there'll be an initial spike, and then it'll peter out again. It'll become normalized.
Yeah.
But you say, you know, what are the kids going to think? And yeah, there is some validity to the idea that, you know, we lessen punishments on these and we start talking about them in positive ways, then kids are going to start thinking it's okay to do. Well, kids are already thinking it's okay to do.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
this just opens up opportunities to present them with proper education and maybe proper training on how to deal with these challenging experiences of the psyche.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a valid argument, because even if kids did psilocybin mushrooms, and they will do them anyway, regardless if it's decriminalized or not, I don't think there's going to be a ton of harm that comes from that.
I agree. And I would much rather a kid take a gram of shrooms or a half gram, like a small amount, than never drank and he's like, I'm going to drink this 750 of Fireball.
Yeah, and put that poison in your body.
Exactly. They're like, those are two totally different things, and because one is just more stigmatized, it's like, oh, I'd rather the kid drink, you know.
But the alcohol's way more addictive.
Oh yeah.
Psilocybin's non-addictive, so
Mm-hmm.
it actually is being shown in a lot of studies to help people come out of addictions.
Yeah.
But my argument here is, you know, there's definitely people out there who are in the camp, and it's a valid point that you know, people should not be exposed to mind-altering substances before the brain is fully developed, right?
Yep.
At 24, something like that. I agree with that for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But I have had lots and lots of interesting conversations with people who use these medicines in shamanic ways, almost traditional. Well, I'll just speak about it. So I went to a Detroit psychedelic conference, and I met a whole group of people, at this African American group of people, you know, maybe 30 or 40 people who are deep into the psychedelic world, but they're using it from an African shamanistic point of view. And
cool.
yeah, it was super cool to hear, because I'd never heard these perspectives. And they were talking about you know, midwifery and giving birth in water births, but then the mother will be on psilocybin mushrooms as she's giving birth, and then right after birth they'll put a little bit of psilocybin in the baby's mouth to help spark neurogenesis, because you know, well, we know now that psilocybin helps in neurogenesis and
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, and regrowing of brain cells. So the argument that kids are going to be destroying their brains by doing these, I don't think that's valid. Like, I think if anything, it's going to enhance neuronal growth potentials in their brains. The only problem is, like, and I'm not advocating that kids go out and do this by any means. The only problem is that kids, teenagers, even people in their 20s don't have the life experience or the frame of reference to be able to navigate those spaces effectively, or to integrate the information properly to enhance their lives. And that's where people like myself come in. As a psychedelic integration therapist, people can seek me out. Please do seek me out after these experiences to get your footing again, to understand like what just happened. What was I just shown? What does this mean to me? And then go into those existential questions with that new knowledge, that new information. I think with the proper guidance, I don't think it would be that big of a deal. You know?
I agree.
I have an interest in preventative mental health, and I think that I have this idea, which I might do as part of a dissertation, but this idea of putting together like a consciousness curriculum for middle school or high school age kids, where just 1 hour a day as like part of their normal course load, they'll go and learn mindfulness skills, they'll learn meditation skills, they'll learn what emotions are and gain emotional intelligence. They'll explore questions like, what is your mind? What is consciousness? What does that mean? So they can at least start to have a framework to work with their minds as they move into adulthood, because puberty is a tough time to deal with mentally, and we don't give our kids skills enough to navigate the mind spaces that we all go through. So I think providing like a little bit of education and a little bit of a training program with evidence-based techniques that we use in sports psychology and performance psychology and meditation training, these kids will be better equipped to deal with emotional trauma and upheaval and transition and adjustment issues and trauma, all sorts of things.
And I'm probably a little biased because I have a degree in neuroscience, but I cannot think of one argument against the implementation of that. That would just... I know when I came to college, I had never drank super straight arrow, and then I came to college and parents...
Freedom!
Yeah, like, let's party. And I didn't know how to drink. I didn't know how to navigate those social situations, so you could hand me Everclear, take a shot. Okay, I'll do it. And now that, I'm done with college and I look back, it's like, oh my God, I'm so glad I have come to a better understanding of how to navigate these situations. Because when I first started hallucinogens, it was for fun. It was like, oh, this is a trip. And after doing it, it was like, this is not just something to do for fun, and this is like almost like a spiritual thing. There's like, this shouldn't be played with, I think Carl Jung talked about that too, where he's like, psychedelics are not just some toy you can just bring out on when you're bored. Like, those are like super powerful tools to open up your mind. And what you said is, I didn't even know like you could go to the therapist to have like try to integrate that experience, because after I did mushrooms, it was like, whoa, what was that? Like how
do we even make sense of the world now?
Yeah, like how are people like just going to work and it's fine, or like, and I felt so bad
because those existential questions come up and you start getting answers from the mushroom, right?
Yeah,
and then you're like, work doesn't matter. School doesn't matter,
it does,
right?
Yeah,
and then you come back out of the trip and you're like, why are people still going to school? Why are people still going to work? Why do I need to go to work? And I call that, sometimes we can have trouble landing and getting grounded again.
Yeah, it's the craziest thing.
But yeah, getting the integration is good, because that allows you to maximize the data download that you just got.
Yeah, so with the integration, are you basically trying to take what you just experienced and fit it into your schema of the world? Is that what that is? Like,
partially, because your schema that you already hold, or your worldview, will help you make sense a little bit of what just happened.
Yeah.
Right? So if I come from a Buddhist background, my understanding of Buddhism and deities and images that I may have looked at may help inform, like, oh shit, I just saw that in my trip, and this was this deity, and I need to focus on it, right? So it can help with that. If I'm coming from a Christian lens, it's going to inform the information that I got, right?
Yeah.
So part of it, yes, is using your current frame of reference to understand it, but more importantly, I think, is that it blows that worldview's, it blows the top off of it,
absolutely.
right? And it allows you to look outside of the worldview a bit more. So yeah, you use your schema to help make sense of it a little bit, but more importantly is that it blows that schema out and shows you that you're limiting yourself by keeping yourself in this box.
Yeah, before I took mushrooms, it was the beginning of my sophomore year. My freshman year, if I was in a class, I was just doing the class to pass the test. I was doing homework just to pass the test or pass the class. And a lot of my actions were just to get to the next step. And after doing mushrooms, it was like, oh no, like, I'm in college to learn, not to just get a piece of paper at the end. That's just a consequence of me learning. And once I figured that out and like actually tried to learn, and I hate school, but it became more bearable. it was like, okay, like this cognitive neuroscience class is not just a class. Like, it's giving me information that I can then use as tools to help navigate this world, especially with what I just experienced.
Right, so that existential question again came up, like, why am I even doing school? And maybe in the beginning it was for that degree, for that paper, for the letters behind your name, and for the opportunity and the doors it's going to open. But again, your mind shifted and you started asking yourself, well, why? Why am I doing this? And you found the deeper meaning. Like, the deeper meaning for a college experience, and I agree with you, is learning. And once you understand that, it becomes a lot more fun, right?
Oh, it becomes
the pressure
so much more
comes
fun.
off your back. You're like, okay, I'm here to, the degree's going to happen as long as I keep going.
Yeah.
It's going to come.
Yeah,
but my focus should be on learning and, like, I want to expand my mind.
Yeah, you could put in pretty minimal effort and get a degree, but you didn't learn anything, you know? And I think, like, and I did this too, a lot of people forget college is for learning. It's not necessarily to go party, to...
Well, there's a whole social learning
yes.
component.
There's a social component. Like, you will meet new people, and you will learn that how to navigate, like, social situations better, and how to act, how to not act, how to mature, how to not, like... That's a component. But not most of it, but a huge portion of it is so you learn. You know, it's, if you go to vocational school, you learn, like, a skill, a trade. You know, if you go to university or college, what you're trying to do is you're trying to think, given new information, you're trying to fit that out onto the world and how you can answer those big existential questions, you know? Yeah, I know biochemistry, why does that matter? You know? You could ask, that's a fair question, like, why does this matter? You know, and I've asked teachers that, like, why does this matter? Why does this matter? You know? And I remember for personality psychology, I was talking to my thesis advisor, and it's a very, like, once you, like, get in the thick of it, you can kind of lose that idea of this is for a purpose, not just to get a grade. And once you learn it, you're like, oh, okay. You know, if my brother's upset, it's like, okay, well, maybe he's a little higher in negative emotion. How can we integrate something into his life that can help him and he'll benefit so he can help answer his own existential questions? And I think a lot of people forget that is college is for learning. It's social too, but we are there to learn, not just party.
Yeah, it's hard to keep the big picture perspective too.
Yeah.
Like, when you're in the thick of it, it's hard to think, like, how is this going to be useful to me in the big picture? Because you don't know yet.
Yeah.
You know, when I was taking calculus in high school, I was like, this is going to be useless. But I still find myself even today, like, using little tiny calculations to figure out, you know, when are these people going to arrive? They say they're coming to, you know, down I-25 at this speed. They don't know when they'll be here. Oh, I can figure this out.
Oh, yeah,
with
yeah.
my calculus, you know?
Yeah.
So in the moment, I'm like, I'm never going to use this. But
Yeah.
as long as your focus is on, I need to learn this concept because it could be useful in the future, then I think you're at a much better advantage than just focusing on, like, this is what I need to do to get the grade.
Yeah, one of the coolest moments I had in my high school experience was my mom, she wanted to hang, like, this banner, and her ceiling is at an angle. And it was in a certain way, she didn't know how to get it to be level, the banner. And I was like, oh, that's just a triangle. You could just use, like, Pythagorean's theorem, and I did it, and it took me, like, 2 seconds. I cut the string length, they were perfectly level, and it was like, oh my god, I just used trig. I never thought I was gonna have, like, that was, like, a real life example, because that's probably the most challenging, frustrating, difficult question a teacher can get is, why should I care? Like, I'm never going to use this. Because every student at some point has said that at least once is, well, what's the point, you know? But when you do have those moments of, like, oh, this is big picture, you know? Learning this in 8th grade, I was like, oh, well, I can just throw that away. But then 4 years later, it's like, oh, I can use it. That's so cool. And when you get into those higher levels, especially when you're dealing with consciousness, psychology, neuroscience, all those, it becomes much more big picture.
So I think, and that's the big picture nature of the mind and nature of consciousness that has me so passionate about this subject, along with this decriminalization effort in London I think it was at London Imperial College, actually. They just they announced that they're opening a psychedelic research institute there, which is the first of its kind, I believe, where they're not only going to be doing research into helping mental disorders and mental health issues, these studies have been going on now for 10, 15 years with great success, but they're actually going to open up a whole new branch of their research center just for using psychedelics to explore consciousness and to explore what the hell consciousness is.
Yeah.
And that I think these medicines have an amazing leg up in being able to explore what that is. Other forms, meditation, also fantastic way to explore it, but that takes a practitioner, 20, 30, 40 years to develop the ability to get the same insights about consciousness and the nature of the mind that the psychedelic can do to an untrained person instantly.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about that, having this decriminalization happen here in Colorado, and we're leading the way in this, and I love to know that we're living a part of history now, and this is something that we're going to be able to share with our grandkids. When it's commonplace in the future, maybe for kids and adults to be microdosing, maybe as part of a nutritional supplemental diet, to enhance cognitive function. Like, who knows the possibilities.
Do you think it'll take the same path as cannabis did, where decriminalization, medical use, and then just full-on recreation? Do you think it'll take that pathway? Maybe not as fast, but do you think it will eventually get there?
Eventually, especially with mushrooms, it will.
I agree.
But just because they are so non-toxic and naturally harvested.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely going to go medicinal within the next couple of years.
Yeah, because, and this ties into something else I wanted to talk to you about, is addiction. In my neuroscience classes, we talk so much about addiction, but it's always in the with respect to the biochemical hook and how the chemistry of the drug is what causes addiction. And although obviously there is a biochemical aspect to addiction, it just, when I was learning it and I was really trying to understand it, it was this doesn't seem, it answers part of the question, but there seems to be something lacking. And I would say the biggest thing lacking, and I think that would be a psychological component to addiction. What do you think about that?
Well, I definitely feel like the general public has been misled to believe that addiction and mental health issues are simply an imbalance of chemicals in the brain.
Yeah.
That is a gross misrepresentation, and completely reductionist, like you said before. It does play a significant role. Chemicals definitely do play a significant role, but that's not the whole story. I work at an addiction clinic where we provide what's called medication-assisted treatment. So people coming off of mostly opiates and stimulants, meth and heroin and prescription opiates, they'll come to us to get some medication to help stabilize the chemical imbalance in the brain, because that is present.
Yeah.
When you abuse drugs, you're flooding the system with all these extraneous chemicals, and therefore your own internal chemical factories shut down because they don't need to make anything. They're getting it all from the environment. And then when you quit the drug, you often go into withdrawal because now your brain can't produce serotonin and dopamine and things like it used to. Usually that's restored within, anywhere between 6 and 18 months, depending on who you are and the severity of your drug abuse history and genetics and things. But it's not all chemical. That's only part of the story. Like I said, we can get people stabilized relatively quickly chemically in the brain.
Yeah.
So within a week, people won't feel withdrawals. They'll be chemically balanced again, but they'll still do addictive type behaviors. And this is the behavioral or the psychological component that you're referring to, which I think is the bigger issue with addiction.
I agree.
We can fix the physical piece pretty simple. At least stabilize someone so that we can start working on the psychological piece, because it's the psychological piece of addiction that underlies the behavior, that underlies the chemical imbalance in the first place, in my opinion. And there are instances too of organic brain disorders and things like that, where maybe the brain function is the originating spot of the addiction or the behavior. But for the most part, it starts in the mind. Everything starts in the mind. And so in addiction therapy, what we do is, and this is going to be a gross simplification, but what I like to do is I like to ask people, what needs are being met by your current drug use? Because there's definite needs, relaxation, numbing out of negative emotion, getting a surge of dopamine or serotonin, feeling good, feeling social. These are all needs that are being fulfilled by it. Okay, let's name those and validate that those are real. And now let's look at alternative ways to meet those needs, meet those psychological needs in healthier ways, so that you don't need to meet it with a toxic substance, right? Yeah. The needs still exist if you quit the drug, which is the psychological piece. And so, we have to address the psychological piece in order to halt the addiction long term, while the brain is reclaiming its chemical balance. The body is amazing at seeking homeostasis. Yeah. So if it's out of whack, it will find its way back to balance eventually. Yeah. And
are you familiar with Rat Park?
I am.
Do you mind if I explain it real quick?
Yeah. Well, actually, let's take a quick commercial break. Cool. So for those of you out there on YouTube, you guys will see the behind the scenes as we switch over to the second segment. For those of you listening on the podcast app, please continue listening through the quick commercial break, and we'll be right back as Cody explains Rat Park to us and how this has an impact on addiction. You need anything before we...
Oh, no, I'm good.
Save that one real quick. All right, we're back for segment 2 with Cody Weese. And Cody, you were about to explain Rat Park to the folks out there.
Yeah, so when I learned, I was going through biochem, we talked about addiction. And one of the things that was stressed was the biochemical hook. The thing that hooks you, like meth, never try it once, because once you try it once, your brain's going to get addicted, that kind of like jargon. And there was a study done, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it, where a rat was in a cage by itself, and it had an option for, I believe, water or water with cocaine, laced with cocaine.
Cocaine and heroin.
Yeah. And the rat just kept doing the cocaine and heroin, and eventually would die.
Until it died, yeah.
Yeah. And it would choose that over the normal water, and it killed it. And they were, the researchers looked at it and like, oh my god, like look how dangerous these drugs are. But then what they did was another researcher, I can't remember the name, but was like, you just put a rat by itself in a cage.
In isolation.
Of course it would do that, And so he built like this rat theme park where it had everything a rat could want, obstacles to climb on, food, water, and more importantly, other rats, to socialize with, play with, And what they found was some of the rats would try the cocaine. None of them got addicted to it. They were like, oh, that's cool, I guess. And then they would go play with the other rats.
The social interaction and the connectivity was more appealing than the drug was.
Exactly. And if you're leaning towards the idea and the hypothesis of the biochemical hook, that wouldn't support it. Because if it was solely the biochemical hook, it wouldn't matter that they had Rat Park. They would just keep doing it. Yeah. And so that points to, like you just said, like that socialization, like their needs were being met.
So the biochemical hook is a real thing.
Yes, absolutely.
We have genetic. I have a genetic predisposition to addiction, for sure. Who's to say if certain drugs have certain deeper hooks in me than others? But yeah, the important thing to I think look at with Rat Park is that even though those hooks are present in the rats too, they still sought connection. They still sought socializing. They still sought other people or other rats. You know, and I think that's important to inform us too for our own addiction in our country too. I mean, you look at addiction and it's an isolating disease.
Oh, absolutely.
My addiction didn't start out that way. I think I became addicted by being social and going to parties and going to bars all the time. But as my own addictions progressed and the disease progressed within me, I wanted to. I no longer, you know, my friends could no longer keep up. You know, I ostracized myself because I was that guy who would go balls to the wall and go too far, you know, and then, you know, my friends weren't justifying my use anymore. They're like, you're going overboard, and then my addiction became isolated. I was like, okay, I can't continue to do drugs and alcohol the way I want to do them with these people because they're telling me what I'm doing is wrong. So I'm just going to take this home and do it on my own, do it by myself, and that's really when the addiction gets really bad. Is when I'm isolated in myself, in my space, in my own rat cage. And I'm given the choice to, you know, drown out my negative emotions with a substance. I'm going to take that until I die from it. You know?
Which is natural, and I think, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, I think that's why the opioid epidemic is occurring right now. I don't think, obviously, like, there's always going to be some sort of a biochemical hook, but I think a big reason is that a lot of people don't have meaning, you know? They're that rat stuck in just a cage, the 9-to-5 job they hate, you know?
Well, not just that, but we're isolating ourselves too. Even though we're more connected on social media networks and thing, that's like all of our human interaction. You know, we use that in favor of face-to-face conversations like this. And when we're isolated just on our phones and everything, you know, you're putting yourself in your own rat park. You know, and you're only getting your dopamine from hitting that like button or having other people hit your like button. You know, that's a real problem. We become addicted to this fake matrix that's literally in our hands. You know, it's ridiculous.
I went out last night with some friends, you know, to celebrate graduation, and in a bar that is just packed with so many people and music blaring, it was amazing to see how many people are on their phones. You know, and if I'm going to be honest, it was hard for me not to check my phone. And because what I found myself is Instagram. That is so, for me, I can spend 6 hours on Instagram, and it feels like 3 minutes. And all I did was, I just took it from my home menu, and I took it off my home menu, the widget. So I would have to, like, open my phone to access it, and just doing that dramatically decreased the amount of time I spent on it. And just doing that, like, I know, because my girlfriend is the one who convinced me to get an Instagram, and then I got it, and then she was the one who told me, you're always on Instagram. Like, we're trying to watch a movie, and I'm just scrolling through Instagram. I was like, oh my god, you're right. It's so addictive.
Yeah, so these people at the bar are all on their phones. Might as well just be at home drinking.
Exactly.
Because it's, I mean, they're not interacting with people. I mean, there's a chemical trigger and a flood of beautiful self-made drugs that happen when you are in one-on-one interaction with someone. You and I, Cody, are sitting here not just sharing words and sharing, we're sharing vibration, we're sharing frequency, we're sharing energy. You know, we're sitting within our own microbiomes. You know? We're sharing all these different things, chemicals in the air and atoms and all this cool stuff, and we're getting healthier by doing this, right? We're degenerating ourselves more the more we stay on our phones and the more disconnected we are. And I believe you're right. You know, opiates have been around for a long, long time. You know, we hear about stories of, like, you know, back in the day, those traveling salesmen would have their you know, horse-drawn carriage and then come around with their opiates or their heroin tinctures, right? And but back then, people still, you know, they were more social. They were more community involved. There was no internet. You know, you had to go talk to the banker to get your money. You had to go to the butcher shop to get your meat. You know, you couldn't just order these things on Amazon and have them show up at your door. You had to go interact with people. And I don't know if it just hasn't been reported back then, or, you know, if you even thought about addiction this way, but today we're seeing an opiate epidemic like we've never seen before, and partially, I think you're right. It is because of how we've set up our social systems to isolate us more and more. And I would encourage all the listeners out there, force yourself to go out into uncomfortable social situations and grow in that way too. We're meant to be social creatures. We get a real benefit from that. I mean, we have studies that show people live much longer when they're in committed relationships, and not even in a spousal relationship, but just like a companion relationship.
Yeah.
People with pets live longer than people without pets.
Yeah.
People, who have close friends live longer than people who don't. There's very real longevity studies.
Yeah.
For these type of things.
And like you just said, we don't know if there was like these huge opioid epidemics. The only times I ever hear of back in the day, like Civil War or World War I, World War II, of epidemics, if you want to call them that, with these numbing, sedative drugs, are people who were veterans, who saw horrible things. And I think that's another example of, it wasn't necessarily a biochemical hook. They were trying to numb some psychological trauma. And that's so easy to do. And that's the only population I can think of where I heard of large-scale opioid morphine addictions.
I think historically, over in Asian countries, especially like China, like they used to be famous for opium dens, and that's where a large number of opium is produced. And when we were in Thailand, we went to an opium museum. And first time I went to Thailand, we went to this giant opium museum where they showed you, the progression of opiate use and opium dens and things like that. And a lot of that happened during oppressive times.
Yeah.
When people were short on resources and felt a need to escape whatever reality was around them, and that's not that's not an unnatural thing. I think it's completely natural to want to move away from pain and to move towards pleasure. Yeah. I think that's an evolutionary thing that is a good thing.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that, pain shouldn't necessarily be avoided, because pain is a good teacher too. And so if we can address the psychological underpinnings of addiction and help people maybe lean into a little internal pain and look at it from a different angle, then we can oftentimes help people heal past trauma that has caused them, either consciously or subconsciously, to continue a self-destructive behavior of numbing. So there's definitely a strong psychological component.
And what you just said, you said consciously and unconsciously. And what I've been really interested in the last year or two with my degree is, it's more psychological than neuroscientific, but psychoanalysis. Because I do, and I'm sure you would agree, that we are subject to things that we are not consciously aware of. And, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If some of those needs aren't being met, you might not be consciously aware of them. And those can severely impact your life. I know myself, I've taken opioids before. But because I have a healthy relationship with my family, I have a great support system that I live with, my brother and my girlfriend. I'm doing decently well for a 22-year-old with a neuroscience degree now. I have no doubt I could take an opioid and be like, oh, this feels good. I can relax, go to bed if I'm a little restless. And then next day, I could go like 2 years without taking another one, and it would be fine. And I think a lot of people don't have that. And I think a lot of their needs, they're not consciously aware of. Because there's like cognitive behavioral therapy that people can use in therapy to be beneficial. But what do you think about psychoanalysis as a treatment?
So I was primarily trained in psychoanalysis in my undergrad. I think at the time I didn't know any better, but today I feel like I still use it quite a bit in my practice, but I feel like I got kind of gypped in my education because psychoanalysis is only one tool, like you said. But there's so many people and universities and educators still locked into the idea that Freud was right about everything, when he wasn't. He was pretty messed up himself. Cocaine addict. Many relationships with many different women, including some of his patients. He had a lot of stuff going on too. Some brilliant theories, but should be taken all with a grain of salt. There's a whole other side of the story in Carl Jung and his disciple, and I felt like I got gypped because we only spent a week studying Carl Jung in my undergrad. So I want to share with the audience, if you don't know what psychoanalysis is, this is the dictionary definition. A system of psychological theory and therapy which aims to treat mental disorders by investigating the interaction of conscious and unconscious elements in the mind and bringing repressed fears and conflicts into the conscious mind by techniques such as dream interpretation and free association. So this is really, it's a broad theory, but it's about working with the conscious and the unconscious, bringing the unconscious to the conscious, and then, I like to use the metaphor, and the same thing when I talk about psychedelics too. But if you're sitting on a raft on a pond, you can't necessarily see what's at the bottom. But if somebody stirs it up, stuff will float to the top, and you'll start to be able to reach out with your hand and literally manipulate the stuff underneath. So with psychedelics and with any sort of psychological theory, for really long-term healing, a lot of times we're trying to stir up some of the trauma from the past, let it float to the surface, so the unconscious mind, let it become conscious, so now we can see it, now we can work with it, because if it remains unconscious, it's very difficult to work with. So we have to make it conscious in some way. And so Sigmund Freud is really a pioneer in psychoanalysis, and like I said, I use it all the time in my work. It helps inform the psychedelic integration work that I do with people too, to help explain what's going on. Why did I relive this trauma that happened to me in my youth, the psychedelic experience? Well, this is part of that unpacking. It's telling you need to relook at that from a different angle, so that you can overcome it, so you don't have to carry that baggage with you anymore. And I want to name another thing that kind of goes along with psychoanalysis. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Johari window. So the Johari window is a technique that helps people better understand their relationship with themselves and others. It was created by psychologists Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingham in 1955, and is primarily used in self-help groups and corporate settings as a heuristic device. So let me pull up this image real quick and show you what it looks like. So the Johari window is this square that's segmented into 4 other squares. So it's 4 squares total, making up this giant square, and each square represents a part of yourself. So in one square, there's the area of yourself that is known to you and that is known to other people. Okay, so and I'll use myself as an example because it'll be easier for me to explain it. So something that's known about me and known to other people is that I like jujitsu. Okay, easy. That's surface level stuff. Okay, so we shift over to the right. Now there's a box that says this is an area that I don't know about myself, but that other people do know about me. So maybe this is stuff that I repress or suppress, or I don't like to look at this part of myself. So maybe I don't know that I'm an arrogant asshole, right? But maybe other people do know that I'm an arrogant asshole, and so this is like a whole nother part of yourself that you don't know, or that you don't choose to identify with or give any value to, but other people see this in you. And then there's another box here that says this is an area that's known to you but not known to other people. So this would be like a secret that I have about myself. So maybe I know that I'm really scared of unicorns and rainbows, okay? But nobody else knows that about me, okay? So this is that area of my psyche that I keep to myself, that nobody can know, right? And then there's this last box that is an area that we call the subconscious or the unconscious mind, right? This is the area of ourselves that we don't know about ourselves, but that other people don't know about us either, right? Maybe it's because we haven't looked into it, we haven't explored this area, we haven't put ourselves in situations where we can grow in this area. But this is really that subconscious piece, that piece that we keep locked away. Even, we keep it locked away from other people, but we keep it locked away even from ourselves, because it can be really difficult to look at, or just unknown to us. Like, we don't even know that it even exists, or that it's even part of our psyche. And so psychoanalysis, along with other methods, can help us dig into some of those unconscious parts of the mind. Hypnosis can be helpful with that too. But psychoanalysis is a long process.
Yeah.
So in general, it takes many, many, many therapy sessions to really get underneath all the surface level stuff and see the patterns of behavior and thought. Whereas you mentioned CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is shown to be just as effective as psychoanalysis, but a much briefer intervention. So CBT can be used very effectively by a therapist within the first session to start affecting positive change, and can be picked up and implemented by a client fairly simple to understand within a couple weeks to start impacting positive change. Where psychoanalysis may take years, may take a decade to get to the underlying issue, depending on the proficiency of the clinician as well as the severity of the patient.
It's tricky. It's much trickier and harder to do. Right.
But there's so many variables to an individual's psyche. Every single experience in our life, whether traumatic or positive, has an impact on who we are and who we choose to be and how we view the world. And no two people's worldview is the same. That's what I like about psychoanalysis, is that you get so in depth into someone's mind that you really, hopefully, start to get an understanding of how they see the world. And hopefully, if you're skilled enough as a clinician, you can set your own concepts of what you think the world is and what you think the world is all about, set that aside, and really take this person's viewpoint and say, okay, now I understand how you could have thought that, or how you could have arrived at the place you are, given your experiences, given your traumas, given what you were taught by your parents. So I really like it as an in-depth. So Ty's one of my co-hosts. He likes to make his presence known on the podcast every once in a while. Ty, come back and help us, okay? All right. So what did that explain it a little bit?
Yeah, no, it did. It did. I think, last night, this is a story, but not last night. I had something to do. It was a Saturday night, and we were out, me and my girlfriend and some friends. And the next day, I had something to do. And it was just going to take a couple hours, and that following Monday, we were leaving for a trip. And my girlfriend immediately, I say, she's like, oh, we have to go do this at a time. I was like, oh, okay, but remember, I have this thing that I told you about that I have to go do. And immediately got upset. And my first instinct was to just get super defensive and, meet fire with fire. We start arguing, and, she walks away, and in my mind, I was like, what the fuck was that about? She knew I had this thing. She knew how long it was going to take me, So then I was like, that's wrong of her to do. She shouldn't get upset with me because this is something I enjoy doing or something like that. I started going down that path. And then part of me was like, okay, but to be the devil's advocate, maybe 5% of this is my fault. 95% is her fault. Still mostly her fault. But maybe I did something wrong. Just slightly. So then I started thinking, I'm like, okay, well, what could I have done? And I was thinking, I was like, well, okay, we have some stuff to get done tomorrow. Yeah, that's true. But I've never not been able to get stuff done when it needed to be done. Okay, so it's not that I'm not capable of getting it done. I was like, okay, well, if it's not that, what is it? I'm like, well, I do enough around the house as it is, you know, like I cook, I clean, like pretty domestic. So I was like, okay, it's not like I never help with anything. So then I started thinking about, I was like, okay, well, then it became like more of like a puzzle. Mm-hmm. Then like I almost like forgot it was like a situation I was in. I was like, well, what's wrong? I was like, okay, because then she briefly said something. She's like, well, maybe. She's like, well, I feel like I can't even talk to you about things, and that was when she walked away, and I was like, well, okay, if she said that, what does that mean? She feels like she can't talk to me about things. So then I started thinking, you know, my first relationship ever in high school was super rough. It was so not healthy. You know, it was mentally, emotionally, physically abusive. You know, and from my partner. You know, that was my first relationship, so I didn't know what was cool and what was not cool. So I put up with everything. And one of the things that she would do, my former partner would just be ruthless to me. Like, do you know John Gottman? Mm-hmm. So he has this theory of the 4 horsemen for a relationship. I think it's